Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Law Podcast. Catch the program Monday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Former billionaire investor Bill Hwang was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison today over the stunning collapse of Archegos Capital Management, which the prosecutor called a national calamity. In July, a jury convicted Hwang on 10 criminal charges, including wire fraud, securities fraud, and market manipulation, for orchestrating a scheme to mislead banks into providing Archegos with billions of dollars in trading capacity, which ultimately led to the collapse that cost Wall Street banks more than $10 billion. Joining me is Bloomberg legal reporter Chris Dolmetsch, who covered the trial and was in the courtroom for the sentencing. Chris, this sentencing didn't follow the sort of normal script or procedures.
It was really just very bizarre. Most sentencing procedures are very straightforward and move at a very time-tested script. The two sides get up, they argue over sentencing guidelines and other things in the pre-sentencing report. And then, the government gets up, they make their arguments for whatever their recommendation is. The defense gets up, they make their recommendation. In this case, it kind of proceeded very slowly and in an odd way. And the judge said at the beginning, this might take all day long. We might have to come back tomorrow morning, which everyone was like, that's very bizarre. We don't see many 2-day sentencing hearings. And in the end, that is what happened. But he did pronounce sentence today. And there was a lot of back and forth between the judge and the defense lawyers. It just didn't go, by script as it usually does. And in the end, the judge pronounced sentence without kind of making the soliloquy that he usually does when they're pronouncing sentences, which is to repeat all the factors they have to take into consideration, deterrence, the seriousness of the offense, all those things. And instead, he just kind of pronounced sentence in a very succinct, quick manner. And they're coming back tomorrow morning to talk about some remaining issues, which include forfeiture and possible bail pending appeal.
The prosecutors had asked for 21 years, which is a heavy sentence in a white-collar case. And the judge gave them close to what they wanted, 18 years. That's a long sentence, especially considering that he's 60 years old.
Yes. The one thing you can kind of take from that, his attorneys had asked for no jail time. And the judge called that ridiculous. He took the defense attorneys to task on that request and kind of drilled down on them to get them to come up with what they thought was a more reasonable sentencing recommendation, which in the end was 46 to 57 months. And clearly the judge felt that, given the amount of losses in this case, he didn't really have the opportunity to send a lesser sentence here. There are certain considerations going into prison sentences. If you get more than, I think it's 11 and a half years, you have to go to basically a higher security prison that, leads to all kinds of other considerations, whereas a lesser sentence would maybe send him to a minimum security or a camp or something like that. So that's what they wanted. But in the end, the judge clearly was not swayed by any of that. And this is a pretty heavy sentence for a 60-year-old man.
Hwang is a devout Christian, and his nonprofit foundation has donated something like $600 million to different causes like homelessness. Did the judge take that into consideration?
Well, he did actually take that into consideration. He just didn't seem to give it much weight. And he said essentially that a lifetime of good works doesn't offset the massive losses in this case. One of the factors that the judges have to consider when they're sentencing people is specific deterrence as to whether the individual would, do it again. And clearly the judge said, look, I'm not worried about that here. He's a 60-year-old man. He's probably not going to commit another crime, but he's a little worried about his indifference towards what happened to him in the past when his former firm, Tiger Global, pleaded guilty, and that led to the formation of Archegos. But like I said, in the end, the judge was not swayed by that. Look, Bill has a great reputation in terms of outside of these allegations. He's well-liked by his friends. He's known for his charitable work. He's a religious man. But just those things alone don't offset a $36 billion loss.
What was the prosecutor's argument for why they wanted so much jail time? Was it under the sentencing guidelines?
The sentencing guidelines are actually much more draconian than that. They would call for him to serve 200 years in prison. And that's the kind of sentences that are normally reserved for people who commit mass murder or terrorists or things like that. So they were well within their bounds to argue for this. And their arguments are really driven by the losses and the fact that other people were hurt by this, not just the banks, including his employees, some of whom lost millions of dollars in deferred compensation and lost their jobs. The prosecution clearly wanted him to go to jail for a long time, and they succeeded. Usually in white-collar crimes, we see much lower sentences just because the losses tend to drive up, the guidelines and what they recommend. But in this case, you don't usually see the government get close to what it wants when it wants a draconian sentence like it did here.
That's what made it surprising when I saw the number. What was Wong's reaction?
He really didn't react, which is kind of keeping with how he's been throughout the trial, very stoic, drinking water throughout, staring straight ahead. And, presumably he thinks he has a shot on appeal. They've asked for bail pending appeals. The judge himself acknowledges there are issues that are ripe for appeal. The one thing he kind of took the prosecution to task for is the argument that he is unrepentant. And the judge said he's always kind of uncomfortable with arguments like that by the prosecutors because people have a right to fight the charges against them. And he's steadfastly maintained he's not guilty here. So he has that right. And the judge said, he doesn't really like those kind of arguments. Whether that appeal will be successful is obviously something that is for the future.
On that point, that's what makes it difficult sometimes for these defendants who are appealing to then speak to the judge and tell them they're remorseful. What did Hwang say?
Yeah, he stopped short of that for sure. That's a good question. Often you see defendants kind of, make their case to the judge, get emotional. Bill thanked the judge for taking the time to be thorough in reading his sentencing letters that his friends and family sent to him, and he praised his friends and family for writing the sentencing memos. And he said he felt bad for the people who suffered, but I would say that the statement stopped short of admitting that he did something wrong, and maybe that is because of the appeal, and that's certainly, we see that often enough.
During the trial, a lot of his supporters came every day. Did they have any reaction to the sentence?
They seemed to hang their heads. They were here every day. They spent a lot of time in the courtroom, in the cafeteria, in the courthouse, and they were there for him the whole time. And he thanked them and he greeted them today, just like he did every day of the trial.
Did the defense ever tell his story? I mean, he has an amazing story, really, a rags to riches story. He came here from Korea and had nothing.
They did go into that. That was kind of the heart of their initial argument, is that that he came here when he was a teenager. His father had gotten a job as a pastor, and he emigrated when he was 19, came here seeking better, treatment options for a legally blind brother. And then his father died within years of him arriving here, and they had to find a way to survive. He took a job as a line cook at McDonald's, worked at Swap Meats, and then moved to L.A. with $3,000 to his name, and lived in a shed in the back of a church with his family. They played up the charity. They said this was not a scheme, really. It was an effort to help people. They don't want to make everything he did seem like some sort of nefarious scheme, when they argued these were just for, he's a God-fearing man, and these were his attempts to do good by his community.
What about restitution? How much do the prosecutors say was lost here, and how much restitution do they expect? I understand he says he's not a billionaire anymore.
Yeah, he says he only has $55 million, some of which are in joint assets with his wife. Yeah, actually, restitution is being deferred for a little while. They're going to talk about forfeiture tomorrow, and possibly any other issues like bail pending appeal, and maybe, reporting dates, the kind of things that come at the end of sentencing hearings after somebody's been pronounced.
With forfeiture, would they have to trace it back to his alleged misdeeds somehow? I mean, how would they decide forfeiture?
So that's probably the most difficult proposition here. The defense says there should be no forfeiture. That argument seems to be a little less forceful than their one about restitution. But the government is seeking $9.8 billion in restitution as reimbursement for the victims, the counterparty banks. And they're seeking more than $12 billion in forfeiture. Now, the government acknowledges here that he doesn't have the money. They say that regardless of the fact that he doesn't have the money, he still should be subject to this forfeiture amount, just like, say, drug dealers who are convicted, who do a drug deal and lose the drugs. It was a very interesting argument. that often is a confusing proposition for people. Why are you going to ask somebody to forfeit money they don't have? But I guess it's attempting to establish a framework for anyone who would seek to recover money in this case.
Does the judge think he has more money than he's saying? Because I noticed the judge said something about Hwang buying a new condo in Hudson Yards.
Yes, he did note that. It's hard to say. The judge there's an extended questioning on that. So he's definitely not clear on what he needs to do here or how it could be done. So that is going to be the meat of tomorrow's arguments.
And as far as appellate issues, do we already know one of the issues because the judge curtailed Hwang's defense?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the issues that they're going to raise. They certainly raised it in some of their post-trial briefings. In their application for bail pending appeal, they've noted that they call out some of the expert testimony for the prosecution's expert when she calculated that some of the trading losses were directly attributable to Wong's conduct or misrepresentations, and they say that can't be proven. So, whether or not they can attribute that there, that might be one of the main things for appeal.
So a lot more to come, Chris, and I know you'll be there tomorrow to tell us about it. Thanks so much. That's Bloomberg legal reporter Christopher Dolmetsch.